Hello, Falcoholics. What is up? Welcome to episode 280 of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin, joined by a wonderful guest tonight. He's Joe Patrick at JAPatrick200 on the Twitters. Joe, welcome back to the show. It's been a busy a month, a little over a month, maybe 2 months. I don't know. Who's counting, right? But
I've lost track of time. I've lost track of time too. It's just crazy. Yeah, it's like you have these crazy, active spells where free agency or whatnot, and then it gets slow. So, and then it's going to heat up again with the draft coming up. So, looking forward to digging into it.
Oh yeah. Well, we're going to be getting into it, guys. I'll be getting Joe's take, of course, because last time Joe was on, I think we were talking about the coaching search and quarterback. So that's all been resolved. So we do have coaches and we have quarterback, which that was not necessarily a given at this point. And of course, talk a little bit about that, but also start turning our attention more towards the draft because, as you guys know, we got right about a month until the NFL draft at this stage. And then we'll be talking about draft picks and moving into the summer. It's coming fast and furious this year. I'm excited to get into it with Joe and with you guys as well. Did want to put in a quick notice here at the beginning of the show. We'll do another one at the end, but for the patrons and for the channel members, we are officially going to have the first live mock draft for you guys. I believe it will be Monday, probably around 6 p.m. I'll put out an official announcement for that, but the first live mock draft will be exclusive for those guys, and of course you can watch the replay after it publishes, but that will be coming out on Monday, and then of course we will have probably another one for the patrons, and then of course one for the people as well, for everyone, probably the Wednesday before the draft. That's usually what we did last year. We actually nailed two picks, the first two picks on that one. So, we got to keep the streak going, but we'll get to that. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Real quick before we dive in to this Falcons just news blitz this week, a lot to get to. We've got a message from our sponsor, BetOnline, folks. The tournament is here. March Madness. It is underway. We are moving into the Elite Eight. It's been, I guess, only somewhat chaotic. I know Bijan apparently is a bracket genius, but you're probably not as well off as Bijan, but hopefully your bracket's still doing okay. But no matter what you're betting on, guys, BetOnline is your bracket headquarters for this season with the best contests out there and odds lines and info on every game and every round right up until the national championship games themselves. You can access the most up-to-the-minute wagering information anytime from your desktop or your mobile devices. Even track your bracket real-time all the way through the tournament. So what are you waiting for, folks? Head to BetOnline today and get in on all the action. Just remember to use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, Joe. A lot to get to. Obviously, the biggest news, and I feel like we're going to talk about this until I've talked to like every Falcons media member about Kirk Cousins. We got to start the show with Kirk Cousins because it's a huge move. And it, at least for a couple of years, solidifies the quarterback position in a way that we haven't had since Matt Ryan departed several years ago. So curious what you think about the decision and the move to go with Kirk Cousins here in Atlanta for at least the next 2 years, maybe longer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good move. It's the one that I preferred between the couple of different options. I think maybe the draft was the preferred option, but it just felt so unlikely to me the entire time that I never really kind of considered it. It was kind of between Kirk and Justin Fields, right? And so I think obviously it's the one that gives you the best chance to win now, and I think it's fun to see this team enter. They didn't see. So here's where I think there's like a little bit of a breakdown between how people feel about this, which is, I think a lot of people felt like the Arthur Smith era was a failure. And then because that was a failure, you kind of start over from there. And I think that that's not how this front office and this organization sees it. I think that they saw it as a failure of that third season for sure. But I think that they saw, generally, incremental improvements over the course of the 3 years. I think they see the roster as obviously being in a much better spot than it was for obvious reasons. And I think that they felt like it was time to kind of push the chips in a little bit. And, this is an organization that hasn't been to the playoffs. They haven't hosted a playoff game in this new shiny stadium they've had, which has hosted all kinds of glamorous college football games and soccer games. And you got the World Cup coming up. And I'm sure that Arthur Blank is just killing him to not have had the Falcons play like a meaningful, national audience kind of game in that stadium. And so I'm not surprised that they wanted to push the chips in. And as far as what, I kind of expect or hope for from Kirk Cousins is, I think, really good quarterback play. What you saw the last couple of years under Kevin O'Connell, I think were the best years of his career. And, he is, we think stepping into a somewhat similar certain, kind of play style with Zach Robinson. So, I hope that that kind of play can continue. And I think that also the thing with this kind of Shanahan branch of coaches is that you are seeing quarterbacks really excel that, are later in their careers or may not have the premier arm talent like a Brock Purdy, but they can get these guys to work if they can make the right decisions and just operate effectively. And I think that Kirk Cousins is exactly the kind of guy that you hope can be able to do that. And if you put the right pieces around him, like this team has assembled, then I think that you give yourself a really good chance to kind of have that explosive offense that we haven't really seen really kind of since that Super Bowl and then the year after kind of era of the Falcons. So I'm excited about it. I know not everybody is yet, but I think that once we start to see him on the field, we start to see some of the things. I think the anticipation for what this Falcons team is just going to continue to build throughout the course of the offseason and training camp. And then, hopefully they can get off to a good start to the season.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing is that I think they were looking for some kind of reliability at quarterback that they just didn't have any of the last 2 years. And that was ultimately the downfall of Arthur Smith's regime, was that they just couldn't get a quarterback in here that could keep the offense on schedule and that could basically refrain from making the backbreaking mistakes. And even last year when we saw the defense really step up, it still was not enough. So you see the team just go out and make the biggest possible addition they could in terms of salary cap and getting the top quarterback on the market in Kirk Cousins. And, for being realistic, and when you mentioned it, like going for a rookie quarterback long-term, usually the best route to go if you're in position to do that. But the Falcons weren't really in position to do that. And I think we're going to see pretty quickly here how ridiculous it's going to get for the teams trying to get one of those quarterbacks where we might see multiple first-round picks changing hands to get the fourth quarterback. So it's going to get pretty wild up there. And you look at what Kirk Cousins was last year prior to the injury. He was a top 10 NFL quarterback. I think he was having the best season of his career. I think by some, metrics, he was in the MVP race at that time. Unfortunately has the Achilles tear that just torpedoes what looked like the most promising season yet for that Vikings team. And, we'll never know what could have happened, but Kirk Cousins, I would say the betting favorite to be better than the rookie quarterbacks at this point, at least for the year 2024. Yeah. And I know that's like a hot take to some people. It's really not. Like CJ Stroud is a rare occurrence where you get someone that just hits the ground running to that level. So, I mean, maybe Caleb Williams or Drake May or one of these guys can be a CJ Stroud and have that immediate impact, but it's rare. It's you don't see that all that often. I mean, CJ Stroud, probably the best rookie since Joe Burrow. And then in between those two guys, we didn't really see that level of success for anyone. So if the Falcons were looking to win immediately and get this team to the playoffs in what is a pretty weak NFC South, I think we all know that. Kirk Cousins was arguably the best way to do that had the least amount of like variation in possible outcomes. Now, the health is a question. I mean, do you have any concerns about the health at this point? I mean, we haven't heard anything about his availability at this stage, and we probably won't until training camp, but curious if you have any concerns about his ability to start the season.
I wouldn't say, like, I think he'll start the season from everything that I've heard from him and from other people interview. I think Will McFadden was interviewing a doctor talking about this while I was listening to. I was traveling over the last week, so I had a lot of time to listen to everybody's podcasts. And, everybody seems to think that he's on the right track. Having said that, I wouldn't say that there's zero concern about it. I think that would be a little bit irrational to just assume that it's going to be perfectly fine. And maybe, the fact that he's dealing with this means he, maybe takes a few more sacks than he typically would because he's not able to escape in some situations where he may have been able to. You might run into some of those things. I don't know. Hopefully he can work around it. But overall, I'm not like, am I worried about him like re-tearing the Achilles? No, I'm not. I think that like, basically the fact that he's gotten to this point in his recovery would suggest that everything is going along fine. And we're not going to have, I know maybe a lot of Atlanta fans have seen the Mike Soroka situation where he just literally retore the same Achilles. Yeah. Hopefully, let's just cross our fingers and knock on wood that that's not the case, but I don't think it will be. And I got to say, Kevin, one of my favorite things when we're just talking about the quarterback situation, kind of how it's changing. One of my favorite stats is Kirk Cousins threw more touchdowns last year than Desmond Ritter did. And it feels like Cousins like hardly played last year because he had that
Yep.
injury. What did he play? Like 8? He got into his 8th game and threw 18 touchdown passes versus I think 14 for Ritter or something like that. So yeah, that's kind of funny. And I will also say, again, and I'll always be looked at as like an Arthur Smith defender because I do think that he's a better coach than a lot of people give him credit for based on the way his time here ended. But I will say that he ran into some really bad timing as the coach with there just not being a quarterback like Kirk Cousins available to be to be acquired by the team during his time. It was a like historically bad quarterback class that year where they took Ritter, who was the second quarterback off the board despite being a 3rd round pick. And so, that's the way that coaching in the NFL goes. The breaks don't always go your way, but you still have to win, so that's always going to be the expectation. But I'm really happy for the organization now that it does seem like they have, the right kind of guy in place to bring that stability, like you said. And I will say, just having been in the room for that introductory press conference, there is like an aura when he comes in, like you feel like like an adult is in the room, as opposed to like a rookie quarterback. I guess Ritter wasn't technically a rookie, but he was undergoing his first experience. So you felt like that kind of Matt Ryan type of like, I'm the executive of this playing staff, like I'm the executive. I'm going to get these guys. I'm going to sit down with Kyle Pitts. Like there was a very kind of the demeanor that he brought to that, I think was encouraging in and of itself. And we, can analyze the arm and how he actually plays on the field. But I think just having that kind of personality and that kind of leadership at the quarterback position from the offseason and kind of leading that program with the other players, I think is going to be hugely beneficial for especially the skill pieces, these young skill pieces that he has around him.
Yeah, and that's definitely where we'll go next, talking about the additions that they have made in free agency before we talk about the additions that haven't been made yet that are kind of interesting. But I mean, you said it, like it's such a big boost to the team, and it's kind of wild seeing like the over-unders for teams are starting to come out, the really preliminary stuff, and you see the Falcons like 10.5 wins, which is just, it feels absurd considering this team won 7 games last year, but that's the impact of quarterback play. Like, there's 2 types of teams in the NFL, right? The ones that have a quarterback and the ones that don't. And so the Falcons do have one now, and they need to make the most of it for the 2 years here that they have been pretty affordable. I mean, this year, $25 million, that's a bargain. That's less than Baker Mayfield's getting from the Bucs this year. And, next year, I believe it goes up to 35 or 37. So it's, the next 2 years are relatively affordable years for Cousins, and then the team has option years, the final 2, that would be very expensive. But, if you're rolling, then maybe you do stick around. But, they've certainly set themselves up where the playoffs are no longer a hope. It's an expectation. And, I like that the coaching staff went ahead and made that move to sort of set themselves up with that type of expectation and hopefully we'll get it in year 1 because, again, it has been quite a drought of playoffs for Atlanta. I mean, going back to 2017 at this stage to not only make the playoffs but have a winning record. And until, last year, we hadn't even had a winning record at any point in like 4 or 5 years. So, small steps. Hopefully this year he can take the step into the playoffs. But the Falcons they basically invested their free agency period into the offense, which was the big issue last year. The defense, for its flaws, which were certainly there, the defense played fine. The defense was really not the issue. Maybe, the last like 2 games you could call out as being particularly bad, but it's not like, the defense didn't have to contend with turnovers on the offensive side of the ball too. So that's definitely part of it. But what do you think about all the additions on the offensive side? The team bringing in Darnell Mooney with a pretty big contract, which shows a level of trust in him to be a primary option in the passing game, getting a guy like Rondale Moore via trade. What do you think about the additions they've made in terms of the weapons and how they complement what the Falcons already had?
I think they're super exciting signings because, I think I've heard Aaron Freeman talk about this when talking about that team that went to the Super Bowl, having a player like Taylor Gabriel who could just kind of, take the top off defenses. And he wasn't like an all around player, obviously, but he was extremely effective in what he was able to do and how they were able to utilize him. And I've always just felt like, I just never agreed with Arthur Smith's kind of the archetypes that he was bringing in at wide receiver. I obviously understand wanting to get a guy like Kyle Pitts and Drake London. They're incredible talents, but when you weren't really able to utilize complementary players effectively around them with like that have speed like these guys that the Falcons have just signed, it always just felt like they were kind of plotting in that sense. Like you didn't really have that guy who could take the top off. I think later in the season last year, they tried to start using Scotty Miller a lot more, but there wasn't a connection there. I felt like Desmond Ridder, and I don't know exactly who, what the root of that disconnection was, but Ridder was unable to hit a lot of deep balls. Mariota wasn't able to hit deep balls the year before that. They just have never had that explosive element to their game. And I think that when you look at Mooney and Moore, especially, those two players have that kind of that kind of dynamism about them, about their athletic profile that is exciting, I think, for a team that really wants to pick up those chunk yardage and have that kind of explosive ability to their offensive style. And so I think that's great. I think that, everybody's talked about it at this point, but just kind of going away from that wide receiver philosophy seems to be something that stood out, where you're having more of these kind of separation type wide receivers as opposed to what I would call like a ball winning wide receiver, someone who can just kind of go up and get it. So I think it's exciting. I did notice that when Raheem Morris was speaking at his press conference at the owners' meetings, he mentioned in talking about Darnell Mooney, he said he gets me really excited to think about what he can be as an X receiver. And I thought it was interesting to hear him just be that specific about it. And I think it leads us to the idea of that this team potentially wanting to use Drake London actually as a lot more of a slot receiver. We know from watching this Rams offense that they obviously utilize that slot receiver a lot as a pass catcher, but you also need to be a physical blocker. And we think that Drake London, just with his physical profile, he can kind of be that guy with some of those tighter splits to the line of scrimmage. So I think they're interesting additions. I think they're it gets me excited because it feels like this team now has an opportunity to be that explosive team that it just never felt like they were going to be when you have like Mac Hollins opposite Drake London, and I hate to say that because, he's a super nice guy. Like I love Mac Hollins as a person and a personality for sure. And I think he's a great locker room guy too, but he just like, as far as just actually creating explosive plays in the offense, I think that when Jonnu Smith ran that tunnel screen for a touchdown against the Vikings, that was the first touchdown the Falcons had scored that year from outside the red zone, which is just that's way too long. You can't expect to be a good offense if you're not kind of creating those explosive scoring plays. So I hope that Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore can help contribute to that.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to really the root of the problems with Arthur Smith's offense, which is that we knew from his time in Tennessee and from talking to him that there were two big tenets of his offense, is that he wants to run the ball effectively, and I think he accomplished that. And then he also, the other part of the offense is you have to be able to hit, deep shots off of play action to open things up for the run game, or else teams are going to overload. And they never were able to achieve that second half, and that's what made Tennessee's offenses so good, was that they were able to do that. And it sort of, led to this positive feedback loop for both sides of the, for the running game and the passing game. And instead, Atlanta just never got the passing game going, and the run game just got sort of figured out and loaded up and stopped. And that was ultimately, I think, what, ushered Arthur Smith out of here. And obviously best of luck to him with the Steelers. I'm glad that, he immediately gets another opportunity there, but the Falcons definitely invested in a lot of speed, which they didn't do as much of last year, or really any year under Arthur Smith. But you bring up an interesting point about where they're going to play Drake London, where are they going to play Darnell Mooney. Rondale Moore has obviously been a guy that's almost played entirely in the slot, so you sort of think he's in the mix there too. But I think they're going to rotate. Like you said, Drake London has had plenty of success in the slot going back to his college days too. Darnell Mooney played about half his snaps in the slot and half outside, so he can do both as well. And then, there's obviously the talk about, is Kyle Pitts going to play in the slot? Is Kyle Pitts going to play outside? Is he going to play inline? What's he going to do? So, hopefully they'll be able to keep teams guessing with these versatile guys they've acquired. I mean, I think Rondale Moore is the only one that really is a slot-only guy, so...
Yeah. A couple of things, Kevin, that I've just been thinking about since you've been talking. First of all, to the point about the team not having that explosive dynamic to it last year, I'll never forget that watching that Lions game. I think it was the third game of the year.
Yeah.
and they were just like, screw it, we're going to put everybody up at the line of scrimmage, and we're going to let our defensive backs play in one-on-one coverage against these guys and not get burned deep. And they didn't. Like there were a couple opportunities. Kyle Pitts had that one that again just got missed, but they clearly thought that Desmond Ridder was not going to be able to connect on some of these passes, and surely he wasn't able to. And so I think that's again just kind of another data point there. And then the other one was, I remember watching the game against the Colts, and I was noticing Josh Downs for the Colts and the way that they were using him in motion. He's super fast, and they were just able to kind of get him, like put him in motion and then hit him in the flat or something like that. And I noticed when Raheem Morris was talking, I think he said we kind of have three receivers, and he was kind of referring to like Mooney being a guy who can like hit you deeper down the field, Drake London working the intermediate routes, and Rondale Moore as I think kind of in their eyes being some of that Josh Downsy kind of player who's kind of gadgety. You can use him in all kinds of different motions and get the ball to him quick and let him get the ball to him in space and let him work. And so hopefully that can be effective. It certainly seems to me like it's a more thought out might seem like disrespectful to the previous staff, but it just seems like there's like more ways this team is going to be able to hurt the opposition next year with this receiving core.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, Arthur Smith, he did a lot of things well. And he obviously didn't get this team to the playoffs, and fans are going to be upset about that. I mean, I was upset about that certainly, but he didn't emphasize the wide receiver position other than Drake London, and it was just a constant thing. They tried to win in other ways, and I don't necessarily think that strategy was inherently flawed. It just didn't work out. They missed on some of the guys they needed to get, and it just didn't work out. So hopefully this strategy, where it's going to be very different, they're going to have all of these. We're probably going to see three wide receivers as the primary offense, like 80+% of the time, which is the complete opposite of the Arthur Smith offense. But it's probably still going to be a pretty run heavy attack. I mean, and Kirk Cousins is used to playing with that. And that's one of the big reasons why this was such a good fit, is because Kirk Cousins is familiar with this offense. It's going to be a quick adjustment for him. And hopefully the team is able to hit the ground running quickly. I hope that they're able to do that, because I think fans are very impatient, as they should be at this stage, because it's been a long time, certainly.
Kevin, something that stuck out to me, and it was too early to really ask about it specifically, especially in this particular press conference, but during Kirk Cousins' introductory press conference, I got the feeling that he's almost going to be involved in helping shape the offense itself. Like, because he's working with Zach Robinson, who's kind of coming up with, his first playbook, he's just doing this for the first time as a play caller and offensive coordinator. And so I almost got the feeling that Kirk Cousins is going to kind of be there, not to necessarily draw up the plays and whatnot, but be able to be like, let's call it this, let's call it that. Like Kirk Cousins might have ideas on how this new offense how all the players can kind of get on the same footing in a quicker way, which again, I think you have to take into account as to why they wanted to go out and sign a veteran quarterback in this situation, and one that I think would fit really well with Zach Robinson. So, I listen, I think it's been a super optimistic, off season. I know a lot of people were expecting some more defensive signings in this free agency period. I certainly was as well, especially considering how they've utilized their free agency dollars in previous years. But I still think that that's clearly going to be on their mind as we go forward this offseason, whether that's in the draft or in a trade or maybe even both. So, I think there's a lot to like with what this team is doing offensively, though. It's just shaping up to be just so much just better overall. And to get back to what you were saying about the running game, I don't know. I have no idea if I'm talking out my ass here, but it seemed, Arthur Smith was really committed to that wide zone running style. And it seems like Sean McVay, and I don't know, didn't watch Minnesota closely enough to know, but it seemed like the Rams really kind of pivoted off of the wide zone and went more to that gap scheme. And I'm interested to see if the Falcons do more of that this year with their running game, because it feels like a guy like Tyler Algier could be effective in that role as well. And, obviously Bijan's going to be able to be effective in any kind of any kind of scheme. So I am curious to see if there are kind of those tweaks, and I think it could help, because it seemed like that wide zone just became much more ineffective that third year of Arthur Smith's tenure.
Yeah, and the Rams were always a wide zone team for so many years, and last year they really did pivot to just be versatile and kind of just do whatever seemed to be working. And I think that's necessary because the entire NFL just started to run wide zone. I mean, it was just like everyone's running wide zone except for a handful of teams, and defenses just knew how to stop it. They just learned how to adjust to it. So I think you got to keep innovating and keep changing. And I think the Falcons are obviously built in terms of the offensive line to be able to run wide zone, but I don't know that there's any reason they couldn't be able to run some gap, some power type stuff here. And I'd like to see that. I do think that that's something that we're probably going to see more of here, more like scheme agnosticism in the run game, where they're just going to do what they think will work, and be able to take advantage of Bijan, who can do it all. That I think that includes the passing game, where hopefully Bijan be a little bit more seasoned with the route tree and not try to catch everything with one hand, even though it worked most of the time. It was really impressive, but two hands usually is better. But I don't want to critique too much because there were some sick catches in there, but No, I think honestly, I think to just I think it's a legitimate criticism to make of Bijan, and just I think maybe of our expectations, because I think that the way that he was profiled in that draft process was that he's going to be this really good not just pass catcher, but really like a route runner. And he even talked to me. I talked to him after one of the OTA practices about how he was working out with Jamar Chase and about how he was getting these great tips from him, and really like on some of the smaller details about running routes. But then having watched the games, it really, I think it was clearly obvious on several occasions that, he was just kind of making mistakes with some of the routes, or at least wasn't on the same page with Ritter to that extent. And so hopefully that improves. But again, I kind of go back to Zach Robinson. I think there's just a lot to like about, his background and how he's going to be able to help get these guys on the same page, as, having played the position previously in college, to, what he did with PFF. And even, I even am kind of excited about the stuff that he was doing before PFF, where he was working with quarterbacks in the draft. I think that could potentially help the Falcons in terms of assessing some of these college quarterbacks and determining who's going to be the best fit for their system going forward. So, but I think it even extends to guys like Bijan, and just being able to help them with some of their, route definition, things like that, to just make them more effective in that respect. And I think that also you just generally expect a player like Bijan to improve anyway when going into his second year. Yeah, I agree. And, Bijan, the Rams, I think to their credit, the way they use Kyren Williams, that's probably how you'd want to see Bijan used, where he's catching a lot of passes. He's taking the drastic, just the vast majority of the carries. And it's yes, you don't want Bijan to get worn out, but Kyren Williams is tiny and he didn't get worn out. Obviously he missed some time with injury, but when you have a special running back, especially, and no slander whatsoever towards Kyren Williams, but Bijan is another level above that. And the Rams have either gone full committee or they've gone just, we're going to feed our running back. And with a running back like Bijan, and again, no slight to Tyler Algier, who we know is a very good reserve back. And I mean, honestly is a capable, RB1B to Bijan's RB1A. It's just you have Bijan, and every time that he's not on the field, it seems like it's a negative for your offense. So, I do wonder if we're just going to see Bijan do what the fantasy heads want, which is just take this massive workload. And, I think that's how you get the value out of that pick too. So I think they're probably going to see that.
Well, it's funny. That's the double-edged sword with picking a running back 8th, which is that you want to keep them healthy so that you're actually getting value over the longer term of having this player and the investment that you put into him. But also you want to maximize kind of what you're getting out of him in the here and now. That's the whole reason why you took him that high in the first place. So I think that maybe they were a little bit too conservative with him last year. I mean, maybe not maybe. So yeah, but I basically, I'm trying to say, I understand the idea of not wanting to kind of run him into the ground, but I think, they could have used him more. And I think honestly, for me, it's more of just situationally when they could have used him, not necessarily the total amount of touches that he had over the course of the season, but getting those red zone touches and just being able to get him in space where he can use that incredible, make you miss ability that he's got.
Yeah, no, I I agree, and I do think we're going to see a lot more Bijan this year than we did last year, and it hopefully will be a good thing for this offense because we all love Bijan, and even what we saw as a rookie, I think was really nice, and I think we're in for an even bigger treat this year. And you think about all the pass game moves and how that should only help create space for him, and if it all clicks, you could see a lethal running game and a pass game, and that that's what they're hoping for, right? Is that this is a top 10 easily offense, hopefully even better than that. And then, on the defensive side, there's a bigger question right now. And that's sort of the crux of tonight's topic, which is, what are we going to do at edge? What are we going to do at corner? Because they didn't really make any moves on the defensive side of the ball. That Calais Campbell, his status seems to be up in the air. I know, they were hinting at maybe something in the works with Campbell, whether he's going to retire or return or what have you. But, the Falcons do have a healthy complement of draft picks. They've got 4 picks in the top, I think 78, 79, including 8th overall. This is a good edge class at the top. There's certainly some good corners there. Do you think we're going to get any other moves prior to the draft, or is this? We've seen the Rams rely a lot on rookies on defense, and that's what they did last year. It worked out well for them, but I know. For me, I'm a little uncomfortable with where they stand on the depth chart right now. But I'm curious if you think they are just going to kind of stand pat and see how the draft shakes out.
I'm bought into the Hassan Reddick rumors that are out there. Like, I think that they're trying for him. I think that's something that they would like to do. Whether they actually get it across the line or not, we don't know. But it certainly seems like, based on the reporting that's come out, is that they have had their sights set on trying to acquire an edge rusher outside of the draft, and it just hasn't come together for them. So for that, that's the reason why I feel like the Hassan Reddick rumors make a lot of sense. And I think obviously it makes sense for the Falcons and what they need. As far as the draft, so here's my thing, and I'd love to kind of just get your thoughts on this too, Kevin, because this has been kind of like rattling around in my brain, which is that, like, we know that the Falcons have not had, like a top tier pass rusher in forever, like since the Bush administration. Like it's been forever since this team has had like someone who you could say reliably gets the quarterback. Okay, so we know that's the situation. So you draft it's Dallas Turner. Like that just seems to be like the thing that's going to solve everything. And I just don't. It seems too simple to me that's just going to be the solution to the Falcons' sacks problem or quarterback pressure problem. It's kind of funny that last year, I forget how many sacks they ended up with.
It was a respectable number. It was over 40.
Yeah,
it was huge.
Yeah. I think it was like 42. It was the most. The stat site that I had pulled up to look at this, it was the most they had in 10 years, which is crazy. They still were ranked like I think it was like 20th in the league, something like that. Yeah. But hey, at least they're kind of up into that middle range, which is a huge improvement. And they did that without having one guy who was kind of getting all the sacks. Like Calais and Bud both had 6.5. You got a few from Arnold Ep280. So I'm just kind of putting a lot of thoughts out there, and I'll also say this. As far as Calais Campbell goes, it was funny because I heard a lot of people talking like optimistically about him potentially returning. I actually took Raheem's comments as being like, yeah, he's not coming back.
Yeah, and, I thought it was like low key he's retiring was kind of what he was saying. But
that's kind of the vibe I got too. I would be really surprised if that is the case, just because talking to him in the exit interviews after the season, he seemed like pretty dead set on coming back. He was like, I'm still playing at an elite level.
Yeah.
Like all this stuff. And I always thought that the kind of obvious thing would be to just follow Ryan Nielsen to Jacksonville, where he's played before. And I think, Ryan Nielsen really appreciates him. I think he appreciates Ryan Nielsen, and Ryan Nielsen will let him play as an edge, which is what he wants. And at this stage of his career, he gets to choose that. He gets to choose whether he plays and whether he plays as an edge or whatnot. So I just don't really see the fit being there. I'm sure like it would really help the Falcons to have a player like him, obviously, but ultimately I just don't see the Falcons being in a position to really be able to really lure him back. But who knows? We'll see. Yeah. But again, I want to just kind of wrap up by saying, like, I don't know if just drafting an edge at 8 is going to necessarily fix the problems. I will say that if you do want to draft an edge at 8, I actually would prefer, or just draft an edge with your first round picks. They could trade down, which I think everybody is kind of in favor of at this point. I think Latu is the move, because he seems like the player who's most ready to give you sack production in the immediate term, which is the way that this team is built. We were just talking about the whole first part of the show. It's like this team's ready to win, this year, next year, and maybe the year after if Kirk Cousins is still playing at a good level. Seems to me like that's like where Latu could really shine and really be a game changer for the defense. And I think that Dallas Turner is more like it's more of a long-term bet. Not to say that any of these guys are going to be a short-term player or a long-term player in their career, but it just seems to me like if you want to bring in a guy who's going to be an immediate game changer for you in terms of getting to the quarterback, seems to me like Latu would be the guy you go to. And again, it's kind of always like, if the medicals are cleared, but I have
the medicals allegedly are clear based on what I've heard. Right. So like, again, and I think you could make, and this is such a fun edge group at the top, because I think you can make a case for any of them. And if you believe the reporting from last year, the Falcons were going to take Verse at 8 if he had come out. So obviously he's out now and he's available. So, to me, it's like, I wouldn't rule out that Verse isn't just going to be the pick again. Dallas Turner is everyone's seeming favorite guy. I do have Verse number 1 still, and it's for the reasons you said. Like Dallas Turner he's got a longer runway than the other two right now, and they kind of each have their pluses and minuses. Dallas Turner's obviously the prototype guy. And his when he tested him with those 34.5-inch arms too, it was like, oh, okay, so he checks like every box. Okay, I see. But he's needs the most work, and he's not gonna be able to play the run. We just to start. And that's just what you're going to be okay with that. Then you got Jared Verse, who's kind of like in between him and Latu. Like Verse is polished and all this. He's not the athlete that Turner is, but he's got the good size, and he's still a very good athlete. All of these guys have like 9 RAS scores or higher. Like they're all great athletes, but Verse kind of in the middle there. And then you got Latu, who is a little bit older, but the most polished, like probably the most polished pass rusher like I've ever seen come out of college, or close to it. Like, he executes moves like a 10-year vet. He's special in that way. So if the medicals are clear and you want a guy who's going to be able to come in and whip NFL caliber tackles from day one, Latu is the safest bet there. But again, he's not as athletic. He doesn't necessarily have the length, the size that the other two have, and he's older. Turner's going to be like 21 this year. So it's just pick your flavor of which one you want. I think all three make sense. I think that's also a reason why a trade down is obvious. Like if they have a suitor for the pick, it's probably going to be a trade down, because the simple topic of if you go down to like 11 or 12, as long as you get in front of the Saints, basically, you're going to have one of these three, and they all make sense on one level or another. And, maybe Verse for Ryan Nielsen's defense would have been like the slam dunk pick, given, he's probably a little bit better suited to the 4-3 end, but we've seen him stand up and rush too. So it's, they could do whatever they want with these three guys, but I like all three. I have Verse 1, but it's like splitting hairs because they're all great prospects. Yeah.
Like, I don't do like a actual rankings for any of these positions, but like I could very well see Verse being the top player. But if he's not like a perfect fit for your team, and I'm not talking about anybody, like you might have him 1, but in this class, if he's not like, if you think that you might want to have an edge rusher who's more, athletic on the edge, and maybe you go with a Dallas Turner, or, if you want the immediate, whatever it is, you can justify any of these guys being the best option for your team, or for any of these guys to be a great option for your team, which is why, you would be okay with trading back. So it's really interesting from that perspective. I will say though that, and I would love to get your insight again on this. The Falcons have AJ Terrell on basically playing on his 5th-year option. They signed Jesse Bates to a very rich safety contract the year prior. And to me, I would want to make sure I have like a starting caliber cornerback that you feel comfortable with going forward, hopefully on a cheap contract. I'm basically like making the case for why this team might want to actually use their first pick on a corner. That way you have stability there. If you're going into a contract negotiation with AJ Terrell, maybe you're not like, so desperate to bring him back. You actually have some leverage in that negotiation. And whether it makes sense to sign like there was a lot, obviously it's not going to happen now, but there was a lot of conversation about the Falcons signing L'Jarius Sneed, and I just never saw it as being like a realistic option for them based on the contracts that they'd be paying to all these guys. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. And like, I sort of think they're in negotiations with Terrell, and like that might be also why their moves are they haven't made a lot of moves, is because they're waiting to clear the cap from Terrell's extension and that sort of thing. And there's not necessarily a ton of pressure to get it done unless the Hassan Reddick trade was like imminent, in which case they could just restructure guys. Like, people don't understand. Like, I saw somebody like tweet something that was like, oh, the Falcons are already out of money. Wow, this team is like so poorly run or something. It's like, they haven't even begun to make money yet. Like, that was just like the money they had. Like, they haven't even started to like do anything with the cap to like create stuff or move stuff around. Like, it's they have so like they could create $50 million without too much trouble. Like, not saying that they should do that. That would create problems later, but they could. So, this Hassan Reddick thing, it sounds like the Eagles want a second and no one's willing to give it to him, which like, they're not going to get a second for him. He's 30. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, well, his production was similar to Brian Burns. Brian Burns is 25. Okay. Like, it's a completely different situation. Hassan Reddick is very good, but you just typically don't see that type of compensation traded for guys entering their 30s. It's just the way it is. So the Eagles, I'm sure, know that, but they're going to try to play hardball for a while. The Falcons, this is one thing that Fontenot has always done well, is they're not going to overpay. Typically, they really haven't done that on any contract or any trade. They've sort of stood their ground, and I think people would have preferred they overpaid for like Montez Sweat at this point or whatever it might be, but they have not done that. They have their amount, and they're not going to bend on that. So we'll see if that does eventually get done. But like you said, they need to have some pieces they can rely on long term. And I do think Terrell is one that they're going to want to rely on. So, but then the cornerback too is an open question. Maybe they do really like Clark Phillips there, and I think certainly the lack of any veteran additions at corner kind of suggests that they're pretty confident in the group they have, that they're not like super concerned about missing out on a starting corner in free agency or something like that, that they don't have, options, whether it's Clark Phillips. We know Jerry Gray loves Mike Hughes, UCF legend. So D. Alford, I think, is the better slot corner, but there's, apparently Jerry Gray disagrees with me. We'll see if Jimmy Lake agrees or not. But so they have a decent group there. Obviously, I think we're talking about adding more, and I'm curious, what do you think about cornerback with the first pick? Because there are certainly cornerbacks in that range that you could talk about. I think it's probably more of a trade down target. I just don't know that any of these corners are really top 10 caliber, but I love Quinion Mitchell. I think Terrion Arnold makes a lot of sense for this scheme, that sort of thing. What do you think about, cornerback as potentially being in play early?
Yeah. When I've done some mock drafts, I like them. I like them the most when I end up doing a little trade down into the kind of middle, maybe even like the late teens of the first round, and grab whoever the best cornerback there. And if it's Quinion Mitchell, he would be my guy. He's number one for me. I really feel like with corners, tackling is becoming a much more important deal, I feel like, for those cornerbacks. And to me, he's one of the better ones out there. And I just think that he's just an all-around good corner. I think he's got the most pass breakups in college football the last couple of years, I believe, at Toledo. So he's clearly got ball skills. I mean, he's just kind of just really solid all-around corner. I feel like he's one kind of like AJ Terrell, where it's like get him, you got something really solid that you're going to have for the next 5 years. And I also feel like, especially if they can do that trade down, if they can do the trade down, and let's say they acquire an additional second round pick, I think that could give the team the ammo it could need to then move up to potentially grab an edge. If there's one available that they want, like a Chop Robinson or something, he could be available in the late first round, or even we've seen, Terry do deals, clearly working on deals after that first night, and to try to move up like they did for Matthew Bergeron. So, I could see them working something like that, but they would need to probably acquire some more kind of ammo in order to be able to execute something like that. But as far as the corners go, I mean, I don't like Wiggins. He's basically the only one that I'm not really sold on. I don't want a corner that's small. Yeah. Other than that, though, I don't have a huge preference among these guys. Other than that, I would say Mitchell's my number one.
Yeah, I have Mitchell number one too. I mean, the Senior Bowl, I think if you had questions about him being at Toledo and all that stuff, The Senior Bowl answered all those questions. He
Yeah,
dominated.
exactly.
Like everyone he went against basically, and I was like, okay, that answered my question. Was it that you were playing a little over competition? Nope, you're just good. Yep, okay, it's easy enough. It's simple. Like you don't have to overthink it. So, and he tested really well too, and all that stuff. So he really does check all the boxes, and I think he's very, very interesting, very good corner prospect. So I do think it's again more of like a trade down target, but certainly in play in that range of the draft there. But day 2 is where they're going to have most of their picks that matter. They got 3 right now, and if they do execute a trade down, they could pick up a second, maybe 2/3, whatever it might be. This is a good day 2. There's a lot of talent there. Safety I think is something that's on the table there. Somebody to pair with Jesse Bates that's not going to cost them a lot of money. Cornerback, edge, whatever they don't get in the first round. I do want to talk about wide receiver too, because we've seen the additions, but we know this is a tremendous wide receiver class. Obviously, I think wide receiver at 8 is less likely. Also, because I think that's one of their prime trade down situations. If Neighbors or Odunze is there at 8, there's going to be teams calling about going up to get them to get in front of the Bears. So, what do you think about day 2, second round, third round? Do you still think wide receivers in play even after all the additions?
So yeah, I do. To kind of be more like 30,000 foot view on this, I think the team is in a lot different spot going into this draft than they've been the last couple of years, specifically because of the quarterback position and how much money that is allocated to that position. And again, it's not to say that this team doesn't have money right now, but in previous years, like last year, this team had like $10 million wrapped up in the entire quarterback room. So they really could, like that gave them the flexibility to just kind of go out there and not be so focused on filling holes that they need to, potentially, make a playoff run this year. I do think that because a lot of people like to kind of go back to the comments that Fontenot has made in the past, where they say, we're best player available team, which I'm sure was the truth at the time. And it may be true now. I'm not saying that they're like not going after the best player, but I think that they are going to be more kind of focused in on the specific areas of need that this team has in order to make them as good as they can possibly be in these next couple of years. And so for that reason, I agree with you that I don't think that they would go for that wide receiver at 8. I totally agree with you that they would trade down in that situation because it then becomes a very valuable pick that they would have. And I think also kind of the thing that has been kind of keeping me from really kind of going full bore into wanting to take a wide receiver with that first pick is that there is a lot of value in this area of the draft at the wide receiver position. I think Ladd McConkey would be like the ideal player to grab in this spot. I think that he would be kind of perfect for this system as a guy who can be, versatile playing in like the X or the Y. And I'm not even a Georgia fan, by the way. I'm actually an Ohio State fan. That's when Quinyon Mitchell actually first came on my radar because he played really well against Ohio State a couple years ago. So I think Ladd McConkey would be good. Roman Wilson was also a wide receiver I really liked. Don't know if they would actually go for him based on the moves that they've made to this point with Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore. Not so much Moore, but more Mooney maybe puts me off the Roman Wilson side. I thought he would be a nice partner for Drake London.
Yeah.
But I still really like him. I love his body control and just his honestly, like it's the ability to just like catch the ball, like running, route definition and being able to catch the ball on your feet and be able to make a move after you catch it. It sounds very simple, but it takes kind of special, kind of a spatial awareness as well as like a physical agility to be able to pull something like that off. And so that's like opposed to like a Des Walker type, where it's like he's more of a kind of like, straight down the field. But I don't know if that's exactly what the Falcons need. I think they're going to want someone who's a little bit more kind of nuanced and technical in their game. Legette's one that is interesting to me, and I would love to hear your thoughts on him because I haven't watched a lot of him, honestly, and but I've seen a lot of people be really intrigued about his potential to go to the Falcons specifically.
Yeah, Legette, late bloomer, big year this year with Spencer Rattler in South Carolina, just phenomenal, like 17 yards per reception, like 1,300 yards after basically not even sniffing that kind of production ever in his career. So, obviously you're a little bit concerned about the 1 year of production with him. But from a like physical standpoint, he's got all the traits. He does need a lot of work as a route runner. That's kind of the big thing with him. You could see that at the Senior Bowl where he would physically dominate reps, but the route running didn't create separation. So it just depends on what they want. But I think the Falcons have the opportunity to take a more developmental traits receiver because of the guys they've added. Like they don't need Leggett to come in and start.
Right.
And I think based on who they've signed with Darnell Mooney, with Rondale Moore, and Ray McLeod, all speedy, like separation guys, I do wonder if they're going to go more for that bigger physical receiver with their draft pick, because even if that guy's not going to start necessarily right away, you need someone to kind of be Drake London if Drake London has to miss time. Because right now, if Drake London's out of the lineup, it's like, okay, we don't have anyone that's like that. So like, I think Leggett is a good one that could play that role. Brendan Rice, like if you're going for something later on day 2, kind of a similar role. Also USC, so you got that connection too. But, Malik Washington, I really like. I think by the time we get to the draft, he's going to be someone that's going on the lighter, the like 3rd round, just elite slot receiver. I think he was PFF's #1 wide receiver in college football last year. And like, I feel like no one's talking about him because he's small and he's a slot only guy, but he's just like a lethal route runner, and he tested out really well too. So I do want, I don't know what direction they're going to go. And honestly, they could go any direction. Like they could go for that slot specialist, like if it's Ladd McConkey or Ricky Pearsall or whoever, if one of those guys is there at the 2nd round, or maybe they go more that bigger receiver route like Leggett, or, I'm down on Tez Walker after the Senior Bowl. Like I was just kind of like, I don't like what I saw there. Still obviously a guy that's probably going to go on the later part of day 2, but I think I'm kind of cooler on him than I was going in. And there's just so many guys. Like you could just sit and wait and see who's there with your 3rd round pick, or you could just sort of monitor and say like, oh, we love Leggett. We're just going to, like in my last mock that I did, it was, just kind of waited till around the 60s. And it's like, okay, Leggett's still here. We're going to trade, a 4th rounder. We'll go up and grab, Leggett. And especially if you get extra ammunition from a trade down in round 1, you can just kind of sit and wait and see what like if you've got a guy you love, you could just sort of maneuver around. And that's when Terry has moved, like in the draft, is that sort of like 2nd round range is when we've seen the majority of the movement. So definitely curious to see. And there's guys on day 3 too. Like even though they've added a lot of guys, I wouldn't be shocked if they double dip at receiver just because it's so deep. You've got these day 3 picks. It's like you might as well just take some shots. Luke McCaffrey obviously is very popular, but there's a lot of guys in that range that could be interesting. So, I like a lot of these receivers, and I think they would be doing do they need a starter from those picks? No, but I think it would be like a mismanagement if they didn't take one in this deep receiver class. Like you got to add more. Like it's kind of funny that like it was like, oh, our wide receivers are the worst in the NFL, and then we make a couple signings and everyone's like, okay, we're good now. We don't need we're not good yet. Like we still need more. Like don't just completely give up on that. But it's a good class, so that's ultimately I think you're looking there for all kinds of stuff. But curious your thoughts on safety, because that's one that I feel like is a big need. It's not like a 1st round need, but a day 2 need where you would really like to have the safety duo be like a strength of this defense, because you've got half of it. You've got Jesse Bates, who's arguably the best in the NFL, but Richie Grant just didn't check the box. Like he was not that impactful safety next to Jesse Bates, and it led to Bates having to kind of cover a lot of ground and be more of that like mistake eraser on the back end instead of like playmaker. And he was still a playmaker because he's just that good, but like you would like him to be able to not have to feel like he has to carry the load completely on the back end. How big of a need do you think safety is? I mean, do you think it's a potential free agency need, or that they might even go like to the draft to get a starter next to Bates?
It's a tricky one because, obviously it's a need in terms of them needing to find someone who can be a reliable starter for them. But I don't know if it's a draft need. And that's kind of like the way you phrase that question, because to me, like I feel like because of the kind of player that Jesse Bates is, who's going to want to kind of roam around and almost play games with the opposing quarterback and just kind of be that wild card type of safety, I would want a player next to him that's a little bit more experienced, a little bit more, is going to be able to play a lot of that that kind of just like that center field in a cover 3 kind of system. So I have always leaned towards them going with one of these more experienced free agent safeties. The one I really thought that would come here would be Taylor Rapp, and then he signed immediately. So, but he was kind of the profile of safety that I thought they would go for, because I just feel like if you're going to draft a safety to be your starter, are you actually getting one in the second or third round that you're going to be comfortable with, that's going to kind of maximize your value, and again, kind of be one of the quote unquote best players available, even though I don't think that they're actually going to draft that way. Is it going to kind of be the most valuable pick you can possibly make at those spots? I don't know. I'm not convinced. Having said that, I don't know how to judge these guys at safety, like as far as like the nuts and bolts scouting profiles of them. So I don't want to be like too strong in my opinion here, but I tend to think that it's going to be a free agent signing, potentially even a trade, but probably not, but probably more of a free agent. But again, we'll see. It's tough to know what they actually think of DeMarco Hellams, because he was kind of thrust into this role, and also like what they actually want to do with Richie Grant this year. It's like, you've got him, you've got this player. He's not total garbage. He has actually come up with some interceptions these past couple of years. He's just obviously prone to the big mistake. I kind of prefer Richie as more of like a nickelback, kind of playing down closer to the line of scrimmage, kind of the way that right? Isaiah Oliver was. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so maybe maybe it is more kind of like rotational. They started doing a lot of interesting stuff with their secondary last year, where they were using a lot of like dime packages, like 3-2-6s and stuff like that. So, and they were using lots of different personnel. I think it would obviously make sense to get a body in there. And I just think that with the young players that they already have assembled, to me, a veteran safety would make the most sense.
Yeah, and I know we've seen this staff like wax poetic about John Johnson, who's definitely not like in his heyday necessarily of his big, days when he was actually a very good NFL safety. He's still a quality safety, but not going to break the bank, and someone that this staff is familiar with. I do wonder if like they end up just signing him at some point to kind of stabilize the room, and then I think you can kind of just see what happens. But like a safety I really like Tyler Nubin. He didn't like test amazing, but people really overrate testing, I think, for safety, because safety's all about instincts. Like, it's all about instincts. Like, you could like just look at Desmond Southward. That's my deep cut. Elite athlete, couldn't make any plays because it's all about reading the offense and being in the right place at the right time. If you're athletic, it helps, but the instincts are the better indicator. So I like Tyler Nubin a lot if he's still there at in the second round. But there are some guys like in the third that could be interesting, like Dadrian Taylor Demerson from Texas Tech is someone I really like. He's kind of underrated. And then who's the other guy? Oh, Cole Bishop from Utah is interesting too. So I know Jordan Watkins was talking him up. Some Pac-12 love there. So there are some guys, but I agree. It's like, I don't know if they're going to emphasize the position in the draft unless like someone they love is there and it's like a great value pick. So we'll see. But yeah, I definitely think edge and corner are the two big ones, and I think we will see a wide receiver relatively early too. We did get a question about Joe Alt from Brennan. Thanks, Brennan, for the donation, saying, what about Joe Alt if he falls to 8? Do you take him? Do you go with Dallas Turner there? And it's an interesting one because Joe Alt is that sort of blue chip tackle that's absolutely a top 5 player for me in this class. Not necessarily the cleanest fit with the roster, considering Falcons have 2 expensive tackles under contract, but I don't know. I'm sort of mixed on it, but I'm curious what you think, about Joe Alt potentially, if he does last, which I don't think he will, but if he is there at 8, what do you do in that situation?
I love Joe Alt, but to me, this is the same exact kind of situation we were talking about with one of those wide receivers, where it's like, if he's available at 8, your pick becomes so desirable. There are a lot of teams that would love to move up. Maybe even it's the Jets, like moving up from 10. I know they're probably in the market to add a tackle, but to me, he's just, again, this is one of those things where it's like, if you're really drafting the best player available, you would take him if he's there. And I just don't think that the Falcons would do that. If that situation were to present itself, I just don't think they would do it because they have these other holes that they need to fill, and there's not an obvious spot for him to just step in and start, which he needs to do because he's good enough to do that. And I think that I don't want to say this. I don't want people to take this too strongly because I don't think Caleb McGarry is like a great tackle by any means. But I think that he's like it's a little bit overstated.
Yeah, he's fine.
How bad he could be. Like he obviously got off to a terrible start last year. I think that Brian Burns, the way that he was just destroying him in that Panthers game, is kind of stuck in people's minds. But
we don't have to worry about that anymore. Yeah,
exactly. That's nice.
His nemesis is gone.
Yeah, exactly. But once he came back from that injury, I thought he was actually pretty fine. I honestly just didn't notice him. I feel like if that's the case with Caleb McGarry, then maybe that's not the kind of first round pick value that you expected at the beginning, but you'll take it at this point. And it's going to be good enough now for this offensive line.
Like I had Caleb McGarry as like a second to third round talent, and I feel like if he was drafted there, people would think of him as like a great pick. But because they traded up for him, he's got that stigma of like, oh, we traded extra picks for him and all that. He is a starting right tackle, and he's fine. Is he like great or a big difference maker? No. In the run game, I think he has been at times. We'll see if he can get back to that, but he's here for one more year. I think next year they can save like almost his entire salary cap hit by moving on. So next year is probably when they're looking at tackles a little bit more intensely. I agree with you that like maybe they go for more of a developmental guy at some point. I think they like Storm Norton. They were pretty quick to bring him back. And I was really impressed, honestly. Like, and Tyler Vrabel too. Like, both of those guys had to play at the same time in a game. It was okay. Like, it was not a catastrophe, which is honestly way better than I could have ever hoped for that situation. But
I think there may have been a point where Matthew Bergeron was the only starting
it was like news
in the game.
Yeah. The newsflash, he played well too.
Yeah.
So like, shout out to these like guys that we've watched in preseason for all these years, finally getting in and doing a good job.
Right. Who would have thought? Like, Tyler Vrabel's like, who would have thought? Here we are.
Tyler Vrabel starting at left tackle and not being bad. Like,
survived the bad
as a
reps
UDFA
in training camp, and
just good for him. Yeah.
If I could just fire off one more take here, Kevin. I think that one of the under talked about potential issues with this team going into next year is replacing, or I shouldn't say replacing, but like kind of complimenting Grady Jarrett. I'm really kind of skeptical. It's funny because there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about Kirk Cousins with the Achilles. I'm much more skeptical about Grady Jarrett coming off a knee injury. To me, that is a harder injury to come off of for a player that plays in his position than the Achilles will be for Kirk Cousins. And it's not that I think that he's going to be like, I never want to doubt Grady Jarrett because he just seems like one of those guys in his life that just like overcomes every obstacle and is just, you just never want to like think that he's not going to be able to come back from something. But he is getting, older, and this is kind of the first like real major injury that he's had to deal with. And I think that the Falcons would be smart to start thinking about, what life is going to be like after Grady Jarrett whenever that happens, and maybe, addressing that with one of these second or third round picks. Obviously, a lot of people like to go for Braden Fisk after he kind of balled out at the combine, but one guy I really like, and I kind of see parallels to him, to Grady, is Michael Hall from Ohio State. I've watched him a lot, being an Ohio State fan. And he's kind of just this like tenacious, like gap shooting guy who can just kind of create havoc on the inside. And I feel like he could be a player who would just be a nice kind of compliment to Grady. Not to say that he would be the starter over him, but just like a guy who can really learn from him, first of all, as kind of someone who with a similar type of body type, I feel like, coming out of college, and just can give you a lot. He's he can just like get owned on a rep, but he can also like bust into the backfield and create pressures or sacks and whatnot. He actually has some really impressive reps at college. So he's one guy I would just give a shout for, maybe they take a flyer on him.
No, I think interior defensive line is definitely an area that they're going to add to. I've found myself adding like a nose tackle a lot, like T'Vondre Sweat,
for
like
sure,
in the third round. But it could easily be like more of a pass rush for this guy too. Like, Fisk is an obvious fit, and like he blew up the Senior Bowl and he had the amazing testing. So he's going to go second round now. So he's probably like a 43rd overall pick. And I don't hate that. I mean, if you get an edge and then go Fisk in the second, it's like, okay, we're committing to beefing up this defensive line. But yeah, I like Michael Hall. I think this is a pretty good interior class too. It's not like stars. I like Byron Murphy and Jason Newton. are kind of like the big names at the top, but it's a good class. Like, I think you could see it at the Senior Bowl that there's a lot of guys that are good, and it's a group that I really like. I think there's guys you can get all throughout the draft. I know, like Ruke Orororo, I think is his name, Orororo. Great name, elite name from Clemson.
An elite name.
Yeah. So like he's obviously someone that's been very popular on day 2. Brandon Dorless, if you're looking for that sort of like versatile and like guy that can play, 5 tech, he can play 3 tech, he can move around. Michael Hall, you mentioned, I like him. If you're going for just like let's bet on traits, Leonard Taylor from Miami, who like started off the year as kind of like a sneaky, maybe like first round guy, and you might be able to get him in like the 3rd to 4th round now. Obviously, I think he's maybe got some off-field stuff, but like, maybe take a shot there. I like McKinley Jackson from Texas A&M. There's a lot of good players, and I think you can take shots here. And I agree. I think it is a need, and I think you continue investing there. And I think they want the interior to be a strength. And you're obviously hoping that Onyemata and Jared are still like the engine of your interior, and you're hoping that Grady is healthy, and the timing of the injury suggests that he'll have, it was in the first half of the season, so hopefully that's enough time for him to come back by the time the season starts. So I think by the time training camp rolls around, I think it'll be like 10 months. So hopefully that's enough time, but you never know. I mean, like Kyle Pitts, took him a full, it's been over a full year. And he might just now be back to full strength. It's a different injury, but I agree. I think it's a need, the interior, and I think that they should strongly consider adding there as well if they get the opportunity.
I feel like it's a weird draft because it seems to me like all these teams, it's so offensive focused. I feel like there's a lot of needs on the offensive side for a lot of these teams, and a player like Newton or a player like Byron Murphy, like in any other year, they would be like, extreme, like you'd be hearing their names a lot, but it's just been so focused on the quarterbacks and these elite wide receivers, especially at the top of the draft, and a ton of offensive tackles. It's just like one of those weird years where there's just so much offensive talent out there. It seems like some of these defensive guys are just kind of getting swept under the rug a little bit. Maybe that's also the fact that as Falcons fans, like we're not looking at some of those players necessarily with like the first picks with the first round talent.
Yeah, it's kind of wild, right? That we could see offense maybe the first 7 picks. I think the Falcons at 8 are the first time where we're really looking at someone taking one of the edge guys, probably. It's kind of wild, but it's just quarterbacks and the wide receivers are just like they dominate the top 10, and then offensive tackle is the other one. So it is kind of funny to see that, but the Falcons might benefit in that they really need edge, and they can have their pick of the edge rushers at 8 if they so choose. So I feel like half the time it's like we want edge, but it's like, oh, well, the edges are going to go before we have a chance. So we're not really going to be able to get the one we want. It's not good value. This year, it's like, oh, wait, actually could be good value. So it means they definitely won't take it this year. Like now that it all lines up perfectly, it's not going to happen. And that's just how this works usually. But it's crazy stuff. Let's see. We got Brandon with the $2. Thanks. Brandon says, thoughts on adding the young Luke McCaffrey to the fold? Yeah, like I said earlier, I think he's a really interesting day 3 receiver. Slot, outside potential, played really well at the Senior Bowl. He's only played like receiver for like a brief amount of time, so again, like he's gonna have to like learn the position. But as a day 3 pick, yeah, absolutely, no concerns there. I like Luke McCaffrey a lot, and I think he's probably gonna go earlier than people think, because again, I think a lot of people like him. It only takes one team to jump, So then we got Jason Gates saying, Kevin, this donation should be sponsored by BetOnline. I think it's pretty suspicious that Calvin Ridley passed up the Jaguars at -300 and the Patriots at +200 to take slightly less money to go to the Titans at +1800 odds to sign him. The NFL should look into this. Yeah, I can't comment on that. We'll have to, maybe he's hoping that he could fly under the radar with all the other crazy sports betting scandals happening around the sports world at this time. But no, I think Ridley only I feel like Ridley's bets are like very sweet. Like he bet on the Falcons to win when he missed time.
Right.
Like he'd probably do something like really kind. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to bet on like the Jaguars to win the Super Bowl, even though I left because I love those guys or whatever, So yeah. We got
his signing. His signing did shake some things up a little bit in terms of especially with regards to the Alt situation we were talking about earlier. Where at first I actually thought that Alt was going to be available for the Falcons before he signed with the Titans, because I thought the Titans were actually going to go receiver. I know everybody had been talking about them drafting him the tackle, which now everybody's projecting him to do again. But I thought they would go receiver. But now that they've got Ridley there, I think it just kind of reverts everything back to how we all thought it would be.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so it's kind of. It's like, oh, it's just going to be Joel after all, after all this,
right,
after
exactly.
all the prognosticating, it's just going to be Joel again. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right there. And the Ridley saga was definitely weird. Like, I never really saw the Titans as an option for him. So
either.
It's going to be interesting. The Titans are going like all in with Will Levis. So you can never predict the NFL. Anything is possible in this league. It's why we enjoy it so much. All right, we got George Costanza with the $200. George,
what?
Maybe, George, what's going on? Is this for the gift cards? Is this what this is? Yeah, I know George is. In case you guys weren't here last year, George is sponsoring a giveaway during the draft where we'll be giving out some NFL shop cards. So I don't know if this is for me to procure the gift cards or not. But he says, I know the offensive line is a strength, and I know we need to work on edge, but protecting a 36-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles tear is the most paramount thing we need to do. Draft Joe Alt. Also draft giveaway NFL shop gift cards. Yes, thank you for reminding me with that. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be upset, George, if they do draft Joe Alt, because I think long term it is a pick that makes sense, and maybe you can like trade Caleb McGarry for something like a pick, especially during the season or something. Like you could get Joe Alt onto the field. I don't really have too much concern about that. It's just like it's not super clean. Like it doesn't fit super well like right this second, but like it could happen, and I really do like Joe Alt. I think he's absolutely worthy of the 8th overall pick, but I do wonder if you can get some team that's like super desperate to like jump up and get Alt at 8 if he is there. But that's we won't know that until the draft. That's part of why it's so much fun. But Joe, we've been going over an hour, so we should probably end it now, because otherwise we'll be talking about, we're going to get into like day 3 draft prospects. It's going to go on forever. So, guys, he is JPatrick200 on the Twitter, X's, whatever you want to call it. Joe, anything you're working on you'd like to let the people know about before we sign off tonight?
No, if anybody here is a soccer fan, I have a website called fivestripefinal.com, cover Atlanta United, so you can check that out. But it's kind of like just in a holding pattern here until the draft. So but I'll keep tabs on the internet as things develop, so you can catch me there.
Excellent. Yes, guys, make sure to follow Joe Patrick there for all the takes. And I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic. Kevin, thank you guys so much for tuning in tonight. Please leave us that 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And yeah, trying to think of anything else. Just a reminder, we're going to have the live mock draft on Monday, probably around 6 p.m. Eastern for the patrons and channel members. If you're not a member of one of those yet, you can sign up until the show goes live. The link will be posted, I think in the Patreon, obviously it'll be posted there. And then for the channel members, I think I'll have to do like a post with it or something to make it work right. But rest assured, it will be sent out to everyone. And oh, did you donate, Corey? Did I miss something? Oh, wait. Okay, yeah, we had a donation from Corey Carter with the $2. Oh yeah, I think Corey's saying you look ripped, Joe. He wants to know how much, how much, what are you at now? What's your weight? You looks like, I think he's trying to get in on your macros or something.
Am I at the scouting combine here?
Yeah,
get my
your
vert,
yeah.
Tiny hands.
Yeah, that's the problem. Did you see Olufushanu? Olufushanu was like 8.5-inch hands or something.
What the hell is up with that?
I feel like it's smaller than my hands. I don't know how that's possible.
That is crazy.
That's
and
wild
also
stuff.
how we were talking about the craziness of this draft class. What the hell is the deal with all these offensive tackles that have like the F? It's like FA, Fashanu, Fatanu, Fuwanga, or I guess Fuwanga is a FU.
Oh yeah.
A lot of alliteration there with the offensive tackles in this draft.
That's right. Yeah, no, it's like they all got together and coordinated their names somehow.
Right, just to make it as confusing as possible.
They're really gonna get like NFL Network is gonna have to like really get in their bag of pronunciations for this show. But that's what I do the live mock drafts for, so I can get used to rattling off all these names under pressure. So that helps me, for the draft show. But guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Like I said, Join the Discord, check out the Patreon, check out the channel memberships here on YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Follow Joe Patrick at JPatrick200 on Twitters. Follow me at Falcoholic Kevin. We will be back with a show on Friday. I'll be recording. It'll be like Friday afternoon because I have to record it in the morning. But I'll have Trevor Sikkema on to talk Falcons draft as well.
Nice.
So look forward to that. And I think I'll be having a show with Will on Will's channel, doing another mock draft sort of thing coming soon. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate everyone for hanging out. We will see you next time on the Falcoholic Live.